Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had all for one instead of one for all. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The summer rain fell in heavy sheets across Kamino Ward, turning the devastated streets into rivers of debris and ash. Izuku Midoriya pressed himself against the cold concrete of a half-collapsed building, his all-might hoodie soaked through, clinging to his trembling frame. He shouldn't be here. His mother thought he was at home, safely watching the news like everyone else in Japan. But when the emergency broadcast showed All Might fighting in Kamino, when the reporters screamed about the villain All for One finally revealing himself, Izuku couldn't stay away. He'd run through police barricades, ducked between evacuation lines, and followed the sounds of destruction with the single-minded determination that had always gotten him into trouble. Now, crouched behind rubble merely blocks from the battle, that determination felt more like stupidity. The ground shook with another impact, and Izuku peered around the corner. His breath caught in his throat. All Might stood in the center of what had once been a city block, now reduced to a crater. His muscled form was battered, blood streaming from countless wounds, steam rising from his body in the rain. Across from him floated a figure that seemed to absorb light itself. All for One, face hidden behind a grotesque mask of scar tissue, his presence warping the very air around him. "You're weakening, All Might," All for One's voice carried despite the distance, each word dripping with centuries of malice. "How much longer can you maintain that form? 5 minutes? 2? Your ember is dying." All Might's response was a wordless roar as he launched himself forward, the ground cracking beneath his feet. The collision of their fists created a shockwave that shattered windows for miles, and Izuku had to brace himself to avoid being thrown backward. He fumbled for his phone, hands shaking as he tried to record. This was history, the final confrontation between the symbol of peace and the Shadow Emperor. His analytical mind raced, cataloging every move, every quirk All for One displayed. Strength enhancement, air cannon, some kind of infrared vision, forced quirk activation. A chunk of concrete the size of a car crashed into Izuku's hiding spot. He dove aside with a yelp, phone flying from his grip. The rubble pulverized where he'd been crouching, and suddenly he was exposed, standing in the open street. Time seemed to slow as both combatants turned toward the sound. A child? All for One's head tilted, and even without visible eyes, Izuku felt the weight of his attention like ice in his veins. How interesting. Quirkless, aren't you? I can sense it, that hollow space where power should be. Get out of here. All Might's voice boomed, but he couldn't move to help, locked in combat as All for One's tendrils of black energy kept him at bay. Run! Izuku's legs wouldn't obey. He stood frozen as All for One drifted closer, seemingly unconcerned with All Might's desperate attacks from behind. The infamous Izuku Midoriya, All for One mused, and Izuku's blood ran cold. How did he know his name? All Might's little shadow. I've watched you, boy, following him to every disaster, taking those meticulous notes. Such dedication to heroism, yet born into a world that rejected you from the start. Stay away from him. All Might broke free, surging forward with United States of Smash primed, but All for One simply gestured and a barrier of hardened air sent the hero crashing into a building. Tell me, young Midoriya, All for One continued, now close enough that Izuku could see the grotesque scarring that covered his entire head. What do you think defines a hero? Is it the quirk they're born with? The power they wield? Or is it something else? It's... Izuku's voice cracked, but something in him refused to stay silent. Even terrified, even faced with evil incarnate, he couldn't help but answer. It's the desire to help others, to save people who need saving. Power doesn't make someone a hero, the choice to use it for others does. Fascinating. All for One's scarred face might have been smiling. It was impossible to tell. Such conviction from one who has never tasted power. But what if I told you that power itself is neither good nor evil? That it simply amplifies what already exists within. Behind them, All Might struggled to rise, coughing blood. Izuku saw it in slow motion, the way the hero's body flickered, steam pouring off him in waves. He was at his limit. You're going to lose, All for One. Izuku didn't know where the words came from, but they spilled out regardless. All Might will stop you. Heroes will always stop people like you, perhaps. All for One raised one hand, and Izuku felt an invisible force grip him, lifting him off his feet. But I wonder, what happens to symbols when they fall? What happens to children who believe in heroes when those heroes fail them? All Might roared, launching himself with the last of his strength. This time, All for One didn't dodge. He took the hit full force, body cratering into the ground, but his grip on Izuku never wavered. Predictable, All for One wheezed, clearly injured but still conscious. You've lost, All Might. Your power is spent. In moments you'll revert to your true form, and the world will see their symbol of peace as the broken man he truly is. Let the boy go. All Might gasped, and Izuku watched in horror as the steam increased, muscles beginning to shrink. I think not. All for One pulled himself from the crater, floating despite obvious injuries. In fact, I believe young Midoriya will help me make a point. You see, I've been thinking about legacy lately, about what remains when titans fall. He drifted closer to Izuku, who struggled uselessly against the invisible hold. You took everything from me, All Might. My empire, my body, my face. But unlike you, I've always understood that power transcends the individual. It flows like water, finding new vessels when old ones break. What are you? All Might's eyes widened in sudden understanding. No. No, you created a world dependent on symbols, All for One continued, placing a hand on Izuku's forehead. The touch was cold, wrong, like grave soil against skin. So let me destroy that symbol completely. Let the world see what happens when All for One's power flows through an innocent child. Let them watch their newest hero become their greatest fear. Please, Izuku whispered, tears streaming down his face. I don't want. What you want is irrelevant. All for One's grip tightened. But don't worry. Unlike the vestiges of One for All, I won't be sharing your body. I'm far too damaged for that. No, this is simply a parting gift. A final move in a game centuries in the making. The pain hit like nothing Izuku had ever imagined. It started at the point of contact, a burning sensation that raced down his spine and exploded through every nerve. But physical pain was only the beginning. Something far worse followed, the sensation of being filled. Quirks, dozens, hundreds of them, pouring into the empty space he'd carried all his life. Each one hit like a hammer blow to his psyche. Strength enhancement. His muscles screamed as they were forcibly adapted to handle power they weren't meant to contain. Hardening. His skin prickled and burned as it learned to turn to stone and back. Airwalk. His sense of balance shattered and reformed as gravity became negotiable. Search. His mind exploded with sensory information as he became aware of every quirk within a mile radius. More and more, an endless cascade. Quirks for creating fire, for controlling minds, for regenerating tissue, for warping space. Combat quirks and utility quirks and quirks whose purposes he couldn't even understand. They crashed into him like waves, each one threatening to drown his sense of self. But worse than the quirks themselves were the whispers that came with them. Echoes of their original owners, fragments of personality and memory clinging to the stolen powers. Help me, why did you take? I just wanted to protect. My children, where are? It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. Izuku screamed, but the sound that emerged wasn't entirely human. Multiple vocal quirks activated at once, creating a harmony of anguish that shattered windows already weakened by the battle. Stop! All Might's true form was revealed now, skeletal, weak, blood pouring from his mouth as he tried to crawl forward. Take me instead. Take One for All. Just stop hurting him. One for All? All for One laughed, the sound wet and horrible. That pathetic ember? No, All Might. Your quirk dies with you. But All for One? That will live forever, carried by the very child who worshipped you. Every person he hurts, every life he ruins when the power becomes too much, that will be your true legacy. The transfer intensified. Izuku felt his consciousness fragmenting, pulled in hundreds of directions at once. He was a businessman whose stock manipulation quirk was stolen 50 years ago. He was a mother whose healing touch was ripped away as her children watched. He was a hero who died trying to stop All for One, quirk stolen post-mortem. He was I am Izuku Midoriya. He forced the words through gritted teeth, clinging to his own identity like a life raft in a storm. I am 14 years old. My mother's name is Inko. I want to be a hero. I am. More quirks crashed into him, each one trying to overwrite who he was. All for One's hand glowed brighter, and Izuku could feel the villain's own body breaking down from the strain of the transfer. Magnificent, All for One breathed. Do you feel it, boy? The weight of 200 years of collected power? The burden of every quirk I've ever stolen? This is my gift to you, and through you, to the world. Show them that anyone can become a monster with enough power. I won't. Izuku gasped, but even as he spoke, he could feel the quirks activating randomly. Electricity sparked from his fingers. His hair turned to steel, then water, then back again. One I saw in thermal vision, while the other perceived magnetic fields. You won't have a choice. All for One's voice was fading now, his body beginning to dissolve as he poured everything into the transfer. Power corrupts, child, and I'm giving you more power than any single person was meant to hold. Either it will destroy you, or you will use it to destroy others. Either way, All Might watches his ideals die. The ground beneath them cracked and shifted as gravity quirks misfired. The rain above turned to steam, then ice, then acid before returning to water. Reality itself seemed to glitch around Izuku as space warping quirks activated without his control. Fight it, young man! All Might called out, still trying to crawl closer. You're stronger than he knows. Don't let him win! But Izuku could barely hear him over the cacophony in his head. A telepathy quirk had activated, and suddenly he could hear the thoughts of everyone within range. The fear of civilians blocks away, the pain of injured heroes, the desperate strategies of police trying to establish a perimeter. It was too much, too loud, too. All for One's body finally gave out. The ancient villain crumbled to dust, his last laugh carried on the wind. But the transfer didn't stop. Like a dam breaking, the final reserves of his power flooded into Izuku in one overwhelming surge. The quirk that started it all. The ability to take and give abilities. All for One itself burned its way into Izuku's core, and with it came knowledge. How to reach out and touch the light of others' quirks. How to pull them into himself or push his own into others. How to mix and match abilities like a child playing with blocks. It was seductive. Even through the pain, Izuku could feel the potential. He could take quirks from villains, redistribute them to heroes. He could give quirks to the quirkless, create a truly equal society. He could, no. He forced the thoughts away, recognizing them as All for One's influence. But they felt so natural, so logical. Of course he should use this power. Of course he should improve the world. Why should anyone suffer as quirkless when he could? Izuku! All Might's voice cut through the chaos. The hero had finally reached him, skeletal arms wrapping around Izuku's convulsing form. I'm here, my boy. I'm here. Fight it. Don't let him win. Izuku opened eyes he didn't remember closing, and realized he had more than two. Extrasensory organs had manifested across his body, each one perceiving the world differently. Through one set he saw All Might's true form. Through another, he saw the golden ember of One for All flickering in the hero's chest, so dim it was barely there. He could take it. The knowledge was there, instinctive. One touch, and he could have One for All too. He could heal All Might by giving him a regeneration quirk. He could. I'm sorry, Izuku whispered, and he wasn't sure if he was apologizing for being here, for receiving this curse, or for the dark thoughts already taking root. I'm so sorry. No, young man. I'm the one who's sorry. I failed to protect you. All Might held him tighter as sirens grew closer. But we'll figure this out. You're not alone. You'll never be alone. Izuku wanted to believe him. But as more quirks settled into his overloaded system, as the whispers of their former owners grew louder, as the seductive pull of All for One's power grew stronger, he wondered if All Might was wrong. Maybe some people were meant to be alone. Maybe monsters always were. The world spun. Colors that didn't exist in normal human perception flooded his vision. He could taste sounds and hear textures. Every sense was scrambled as his body tried to process abilities it was never meant to hold. Stay with me, All Might pleaded, but his voice was fading. Or maybe Izuku was. It was hard to tell anymore. More heroes were arriving. Izuku could sense their quirks like bright stars in his awareness. Endeavor's flame, Hawk's fierce wings, Best Jeanist's fiber control. So many quirks, and now he knew he could take them all. The hunger wasn't his, he knew that, but it felt real nonetheless. Restrain him, someone was saying. Endeavor? The voice was hard to place when you could hear across electromagnetic spectrums. We don't know what All for One did to him. He's just a child. All Might protested. He was a child. That was definitely Endeavor. Now he's a weapon. You saw what happened. All for One put his quirk into the boy. We don't know that. His eyes are glowing 6 different colors. All Might. The ground is melting under him. That's not normal quirk activation. Izuku tried to speak, to say he was still himself, but when he opened his mouth, frost came out instead of words. AI's quirk had activated without his permission. He tried again and produced a sonic wave that made everyone step back. I'm trying. He finally managed, though the words came out in multiple voices. Can't control. Sedate him, a new voice ordered. Carefully. We don't know how his body will react to. Izuku never heard the rest. A stinger quirk activated from somewhere on his back, piercing his own skin. The sedative venom from one of his unwanted powers flooded his system, and consciousness began to fade. The last thing he saw was All Might's face, tears streaming down his sunken cheeks. The last thing he heard were the whispers of 100 stolen quirks, each one demanding attention. The last thing he felt was the horrible certainty that when he woke up, nothing would ever be the same. As darkness took him, one final thought echoed through the chaos of his mind. What have I become? The rain had stopped by the time the emergency vehicles finished arriving. Where the battle had raged, only devastation remained. At the center of it all, a boy who had dreamed of being a hero lay unconscious, his body crackling with stolen power. The age of All Might was over, ended not with his death but with something far crueler. The symbol of peace lived, but he had failed to protect the one person who believed in him most. And somewhere in the void between sleep and waking, Izuku Midoriya began to dream. He dreamed of quirks and their owners, of power and its price, of the thin line between hero and villain. Most of all, he dreamed of a choice that was no longer his to make. What do you do with power you never wanted? What do you become when you carry the legacy of the greatest evil? The questions followed him down into darkness, where 100 stolen voices waited to give their own answers. And in that chorus of the damned, one voice stood out above all others, not All for One himself, but something older, deeper. The voice of the quirk itself, amused and patient and terrible. Welcome, it whispered, to your inheritance. The heroes worked through the night, cordoning off the area, treating the wounded, spinning stories for the press. They moved All Might to a secure medical facility. They transported Izuku in an armored vehicle designed for the most dangerous villains, not because they thought him evil, but because his unconscious body kept manifesting random quirks that endangered everyone nearby. By dawn, the world would know that All Might had defeated All for One. They would celebrate the victory of good over evil, of heroes over villains. They would not know about the boy who paid the price for that victory. They would not know about the quirkless child who became a repository for 2 centuries of stolen power. They would not know that All for One's greatest victory came in his defeat, that he had created something far more dangerous than himself, a hero with a villain's power, a child with the burden of the damned, a symbol of what happens when the line between good and evil becomes blurred beyond recognition. In his unconscious state, Izuku Midoriya could not know what awaited him. He could not know about the secure facility where he would wake, the heroes who would fear him, the mother who would weep for the son she might have lost. He could not know about the long journey ahead, the struggle to master power never meant for one person, the fight to remain himself when hundreds of other selves lived within him. All he knew, in the darkness of his cursed sleep, was that he had wanted to be a hero, and that somehow, that dream had become a nightmare from which there might be no waking. The weight of legacy pressed down upon him, not just All for One's, but All Might's too. The expectations of a hero, twisted through the lens of a villain's power. The desire to save everyone, coupled with the ability to destroy anyone. It was too much for one person to bear. But then again, Izuku Midoriya had always carried burdens too heavy for his shoulders. The only difference now was that the world would finally see him struggle under the weight. And in that struggle, perhaps, lay the seed of something neither All for One nor All Might could have predicted. A new kind of hero, or a new kind of monster. Only time would tell which. Consciousness returned slowly, like rising through deep water toward a distant light. Izuku's first sensation was weight, not physical, but something deeper. It pressed against his mind from all directions, 100 different pressures seeking attention. His second sensation was the voices. Never meant to die like this. My children needed me. Take it back, take it back, take it. 20 years of heroism, ended in an alley. Please, I just wanted to help, he gasped, eyes flying open, and immediately regretted it. The world exploded into impossible detail. He could see everything. The individual dust motes floating in the air, each one highlighted in 17 different spectrums of light. The microscopic imperfections in the ceiling tiles above him arranged in fractals that his brain insisted on calculating. The heat signatures of 6 people beyond the walls, their quirks glowing like miniature suns in his peripheral vision. Easy, young man. You're safe. That voice. All Might. Izuku tried to turn toward it, but his body moved wrong. Too fast with some muscles, too slow with others. A strength enhancement quirk had activated in his left arm, while a slow-motion quirk affected his right. The disconnect made him nauseous. Don't try to move yet. A smaller figure appeared in his field of vision, Principal Nizu, his white fur stark against his suit. Your body is still adapting to the changes. According to our readings, you're currently manifesting between 12 and 15 different quirks simultaneously. Izuku's voice came out layered, as if multiple people were speaking at once. He swallowed hard, focusing on making just his own vocal cords work. Where? You're in a secure medical facility, Detective Tsukachi answered from somewhere to his left. Izuku could see him without turning his head. A 360-degree vision quirk had activated without his notice. It's been 3 days since the incident in Kamino Ward. 3 days. The memories crashed back like a tide. All for One's scarred face. The cold touch of his hand. The sensation of being filled with power that wasn't his, that had been stolen from so many others. The whispers of the dead and damage echoing in his skull. Oh God, Izuku breathed, and frost escaped with the words. An ice quirk, activating from stress. Oh God, what am I? You're still you, All Might said firmly, finally stepping into normal view. Izuku's heart clenched at the sight. The hero looked haggard, more skeletal than ever, with dark circles under his sunken eyes. You're still Izuku Midoriya, am I? The question came out bitter, twisted by a voice modulation quirk that made it sound like All for One himself. Izuku flinched at his own voice, tears gathering in eyes that now saw far too much. I can feel them, All Might. All the quirks he stole. All the people he hurt. They're in me now. There, his words cut off as electricity sparked across his skin. A lamp beside the bed exploded, and the lights flickered. Panic fed the reaction, more quirks activating in response to his emotional state. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in seconds while gravity reversed in a bubble around his bed. Midoriya, I need you to breathe. Nizu's voice cut through the chaos with surprising authority. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Focus on my voice. Izuku tried, but breathing felt wrong when one lung could process oxygen directly from the air while another seemed to be filtering carbon dioxide. Still, he forced himself to follow the pattern. In, hold out, in, hold out. Slowly, the wild manifestations calmed. Gravity returned to normal. The temperature stabilized. The electricity faded to occasional sparks. Good, Nizu said, pulling a chair closer to the bed. Now I imagine you have questions. Is he really gone? The words tumbled out before Izuku could stop them. All for One. Is he actually dead? The 3 adults exchanged glances. It was Tsukachi who answered. As far as we can determine, yes. His body disintegrated completely during the transfer. There's nothing left but dust, which has been collected and secured. But his quirk isn't gone. Izuku raised a trembling hand, staring at it as if it belonged to someone else. He could see the energy pathways running through it, could feel the potential to reach out and take. It's in me. All of it. Everything he stole over 2 centuries. We've been running tests while you were unconscious, Nisa said gently. The readings are unprecedented. Your body is hosting approximately 278 distinct quirk factors. The number hit like a physical blow. 278. That meant 278 people who had their quirks stolen. Some might have survived the experience, but many wouldn't have. All for One had been collecting for over 200 years. I'm a mass grave, Izuku whispered, the horrible realization setting in. He turned me into a walking cemetery of everyone he ever killed for their power. You're not responsible for his crimes, All Might said forcefully, but Izuku could hear the guilt in his voice. What happened to you? What happened to me is your fault too. The words exploded out with more venom than Izuku knew he possessed. A strength quirk activated with his emotion, and the bed frame bent under his grip. You couldn't save me. The symbol of peace, and you just watched while he. The anger collapsed as quickly as it had risen, leaving only devastation in its wake. I'm sorry, Izuku sobbed, curling in on himself. I didn't mean, I don't know why I said, no, young man. You have every right to be angry. All Might moved closer, his thin frame casting barely a shadow. I failed you. I've spent these 3 days thinking of nothing else. If I had been stronger, faster if I had. Stop. Nisa's voice was sharp. Both of you. Guilt and recrimination won't help anyone. What's done is done. The question now is how we move forward. Move forward? Izuku laughed, but the sound was wrong, multiplied by vocal quirks he couldn't control. How do you move forward when you can hear the screams of everyone whose quirk you're carrying? When you can feel their last moments echoing in your head? As if summoned by his words, the whispers grew louder. He promised he'd just borrow it. My healing could have saved so many. I was only 5 years old. The pain never stops. Make them stop, Izuku begged, hands clutching his head. Please, I can't. They won't stop talking. What do you hear? Sakachi asked, pulling out a notebook. Voices. Memories. Everyone he stole from. Izuku rocked back and forth, a habit from childhood that had never fully gone away. Some of them are just fragments, like echoes. But others are almost complete. There's a woman with a plant growth quirk who keeps crying for her garden. A man with enhanced eyesight who went blind after All for One took his power. A child who, his voice broke. A child who just wanted to fly. The room fell silent except for Izuku's ragged breathing. Finally Nisa spoke. This is an aspect of All for One we didn't anticipate. The quirk factors carrying psychological imprints of their original users. It makes sense, in a horrifying way, All Might said quietly. One for All carries the vestiges of its previous users. Why wouldn't All for One carry something similar? Can you remove them? Izuku asked desperately. The quirks, the voices, all of it. Can you just take it all away? Another glance between the adults. This time, Nisa answered directly. We've consulted with every quirk specialist in Japan. The integration is complete. The quirks aren't just attached to you, they're part of you now. Attempting to remove them would be like trying to remove your nervous system, so I'm stuck like this. It wasn't a question. Izuku stared at the ceiling, where his enhanced vision could pick out every microscopic crack. Forever. Not necessarily stuck, Nisa corrected. But certainly changed. The question becomes how you choose to handle that change. Choose? Izuku's voice cracked. What choice do I have? I'm carrying the power of Japan's greatest villain. I have voices in my head telling me to take more quirks. I can feel every quirk in this building calling to me like candy in a store window. What kind of choice is that? To demonstrate his point, he raised his hand toward Sakachi. Without touching the detective, he could feel the man's quirk. Human lie detector, simple but effective. It would be so easy to reach out and pull it into himself. The knowledge of how to do it was instinctive, carved into his brain by All for One's final gift. Sakachi stepped back instinctively, and Izuku flinched. I'm sorry. I wasn't going to, I wouldn't. We know, All Might said, but he had tensed too. They all had. But this is why we need to discuss your future carefully. My future? Izuku laughed again, bitterness seeping through. What future? I'll be locked up forever, won't I? Too dangerous to be free. Too much of a risk. That's one option, Niza admitted, earning sharp looks from both All Might and Sukachi. What? We should be honest with him. Yes, permanent containment is something that's been discussed. There are those in the government who believe you're too dangerous to ever be released. Nizu! All Might protested. However, the principal continued, ignoring the interruption, I don't believe that's the right answer. Imprisonment would only fulfill All for One's final wish, to corrupt a pure soul through isolation and despair. Then what? Izuku asked, hope and fear warring in his chest. Training, Niza said simply. Intensive, careful, monitored training. Learn to control these quirks. Learn to silence the voices. Learn to be the hero you always wanted to be, just with a different power set than you imagined. You can't be serious, Sukachi interjected. The risks are significant but manageable, Niza countered. With proper support and safeguards. How? Izuku's voice was small. How do I learn to control something like this? All Might doesn't even understand how All for One works. No, I don't, All Might admitted. But I know someone who might. Izuku's head snapped up. Who? All Might hesitated before answering. All for One had a brother. The first user of One for All. If the vestiges within One for All are conscious enough to communicate, he might have insights into his brother's power. But I don't have One for All, Izuku pointed out. How would I talk to? He stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening. Through his quirk-enhanced senses, he could see it clearly, the fading ember of One for All in All Might's chest. And more than that, he could see the connection it had to something within himself. Not One for All itself, but an echo. A memory. He kept it, Izuku breathed. All for One kept a copy of his brother's quirk factor. Not the full quirk, but a piece. A fragment. What? All Might leaned forward urgently. Are you certain? Izuku nodded slowly. I can feel it. Buried deep with all the others, but different. It feels warm. The others are all cold, stolen things. But this one. He reached for it mentally, and suddenly the room changed. Not physically, but in perception. Standing between All Might and himself was a faint figure, a man with white hair and kind eyes that held centuries of sadness. Hello, the vestige said, though only Izuku seemed able to see or hear him. I was wondering when we'd meet. My brother kept me buried so deep, I thought I'd never surface again. You're... Izuku couldn't finish. The first user of One for All, yes. Though I suppose in this context, I'm more accurately a memory of a memory. A ghost of a ghost. The figure smiled sadly. My brother could never let anything go, even pieces of me. Can you help? Izuku asked desperately. The quirks, the voices, I can't. I can try, the vestige said. But understand, young one, that my brother's power was never meant to be wielded by anyone but him. He spent centuries learning to compartmentalize, to silence the voices through sheer will. You're trying to master in days what took him decades. I don't have decades. No, the vestige agreed. Which is why you'll need to find a different way. My brother ruled the quirks through dominance, treating them as tools to be used. But you have something he never did. What? Empathy. The vestige began to fade. The voices cry out because they're in pain. My brother ignored that pain. But you could try healing it instead. The vision faded, leaving Izuku gasping. The three adults were staring at him with concern. What just happened? Sukachi demanded. Your eyes went completely white for 30 seconds. Izuku tried to process what he'd experienced. I think I just talked to the first user of One for All. Or a memory of him that All for One kept. That's impossible, Sukachi said flatly. So is carrying 278 quirks, All Might pointed out. We're well beyond impossible here, he said. Izuku frowned, trying to remember exact words. He said All for One controlled the quirks through dominance, but I should try empathy instead. That the voices are in pain. Empathy for quirk factors? Niza mused. Fascinating. It's unconventional, but then nothing about this situation is conventional. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse peered in nervously. I'm sorry, but there's someone here who insists on seeing the patient. She's quite persistent. Who? Tsukachi began, but Izuku already knew. His enhanced senses could pick up the familiar presence beyond the door, the quirkless void that had always felt like home. Mom, he whispered. We haven't told her the full situation yet, All Might said quickly. Only that you were injured in the Kamino incident. You didn't tell her? Izuku's voice rose, multiple quirks resonating with his distress. She doesn't know? We thought it best to wait until you were stable. Let her in. Izuku's voice was firm despite the tears gathering in his eyes. She deserves to know. She deserves to see what her son has become. Midoriya, Nisa said gently, are you certain? Your quirks are still unstable. If you lose control, I won't hurt her. The words came out as a vow, backed by a determination that silenced even the whispers for a moment. I'd die before I hurt her. After a moment's hesitation, Nisa nodded to the nurse. The door opened wider, and Inko Midoriya rushed in. She looked haggard, her usually neat hair disheveled, her eyes red from crying. She'd clearly not slept since learning her son was in the hospital. The moment she saw him, she let out a sob of relief. Izuku! Oh, my baby, I was so worried. She rushed toward the bed, but All Might caught her gently. Ma'am, there's something you need to know first. Let her go, Izuku said quietly. Mom, I'm different now. Inko pulled free from All Might's weak grip, approaching the bed slowly. As she got closer, her eyes widened. She could see the changes, the way his eyes shifted colors, the occasional spark of electricity across his skin, the frost that formed when he breathed. What happened to you? She whispered. All for one, Izuku said simply, and watched his mother's face go white. He gave me his quirk. All of them. Every quirk he ever stole. No. The word was denial and prayer both. No, that's not, you're quirkless. You've always been, not anymore. Izuku raised a trembling hand, and Inko watched as it cycled through different states, becoming steel, then water, then crackling with energy, then back to normal flesh. I have hundreds of quirks now. And I can't control them. And there are voices in my head of everyone he hurt, and I can feel every quirk around me calling out to be taken, and Mom, I'm so scared. The admission broke something in both of them. Inko surged forward, wrapping her son in her arms despite All Might's warning cry. The moment she made contact, Izuku's quirks reacted. A barrier quirk activated, trying to push her away. Electricity sparked dangerously close to her skin. The temperature dropped so fast that ice formed on her clothes. But Inko Midoriya didn't let go. You're my son, she said fiercely, holding him tighter even as her teeth chattered from the cold. I don't care what quirks you have or don't have. You're my Izuku. My baby. And I love you. Something in those words reached past the chaos in Izuku's mind. The wild quirk manifestation slowed, then stopped. The voices quieted to whispers. For just a moment, held in his mother's arms, he felt like himself again. I'm sorry, he sobbed into her shoulder. I just wanted to watch All Might. I just wanted to see him win. I didn't mean for this to happen. Sure, Inko soothed, running her fingers through his hair like she had when he was small. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. But what if I become like him? The fear that had been eating at him since waking finally spilled out. What if the power corrupts me? What if I start taking quirks because I can? What if I become a villain? Inko pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. Then I'll remind you who you really are. Every day if I have to. You're the boy who stood up to Kaken to protect other kids. You're the one who spent hours analyzing heroes because you wanted to save people. You're my kind, brilliant, stubborn son who never gives up on anyone. But the power is just power, Inko said firmly. It doesn't change who you are in here. She placed a hand over his heart. All for one had this power, and chose to be a monster. But you? You'll choose to be a hero. Because that's who Izuku Midoriya is. You have too much faith in me, Izuku whispered. No, All Might spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. She has exactly the right amount. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over all of them. Finally, Nisa cleared his throat. Ms. Midoriya, we need to discuss arrangements. Izuku will need extensive training and monitoring. For everyone's safety, including his own, he can't simply return to normal life. Then I'll move wherever he needs to be, Inko said without hesitation. I'm not leaving my son alone with this burden. Mom, you have work. I'll quit. Your life. You are my life, Inko said fiercely. We'll figure this out together. That's what we do, right? The Midoriyas don't give up. Fresh tears spilled down Izuku's cheeks, but for the first time since waking, they weren't entirely from despair. Together, he agreed. I believe I can help with arrangements, Nizu offered. Yui has facilities that could be adapted for your needs. You could continue your education while learning to control your quirks. It would require some adjustments, but you'd still let me try to be a hero? Izuku's voice was small, disbelieving. Even with all for one's power? Especially with all for one's power, Nizu corrected. The best way to ensure you don't follow his path is to give you a better one. Though I won't lie, it will be difficult. There will be those who fear you, who see only the villain's power and not the hero's heart. Can you handle that? Izuku thought about it seriously. The whispers were still there, a constant background noise of pain and loss. The hunger to take more quirks hummed beneath his skin. Every moment was a battle against instincts that weren't his own, but his mother's hand was warm in his. All Might stood ready to help despite his own weakness. Principal Nizu offered a path forward instead of a cage. Even Detective Tsukachi, wary as he was, hadn't written him off as a lost cause. I can try, Izuku said finally. I mean, I'll probably mess up. A lot. And there might be times when the voices get too loud or the hunger gets too strong. But I want to try. I want to prove that this power doesn't have to be evil. That's all anyone can ask, All Might said softly. The will to try. There will be conditions, Tsukachi warned. Monitoring, regular psychological evaluations, restrictions on your movements until you've proven you can control the quirks. This isn't a free pass. I understand, Izuku nodded. Whatever it takes. We'll also need to develop protocols for if you lose control, Nizu added. Suppressants that might work, containment procedures, worst-case scenarios. I hope we never need them, but you have to be prepared, Izuku finished. I get it. You're taking a huge risk on me. No, All Might corrected, finally allowing himself a small smile. We're making an investment in a hero. The word hero sent a flutter through Izuku's chest. Even now, even changed as he was, that dream still lived. Battered, complicated by circumstances he never could have imagined, but alive. So what happens now? Inko asked, still holding her son's hand. Now, Nizu said, we begin the hard work. Izuku, you'll need to start by cataloging every quirk you can identify within yourself. Understanding what you have is the first step to controlling it. All Might, I'll need you to work with the vestiges of One for All to see if they have any other insights into All for One's nature. Detective, please coordinate with the Hero Public Safety Commission about our plans. Ms. Midoriya, if you could provide a list of anything you think might help your son feel more grounded, familiar objects, routines, anything that reinforces his sense of self. And the voices? Izuku asked. The memories trapped in the quirks? We'll work on that too, Nizu promised. The first user's suggestion of empathy is intriguing. Perhaps instead of silencing them, we can find a way to give them peace. It seemed impossible. Everything about the situation seemed impossible. But then, Izuku had always specialized in the impossible. He'd been a quirkless boy who dreamed of being a hero. Now he was a boy with too many quirks facing the same dream. Okay, he said, squeezing his mother's hand. Let's start. The world outside the secure facility continued on, unaware that in a sterile medical room, a young man was taking his first steps toward an unprecedented future. The road ahead was dark, fraught with dangers both external and internal. But Izuku Midoriya had something All for One never possessed. People who believed in him, not his power. It wasn't much against the weight of 278 stolen quirks, and the legacy of Japan's greatest villain. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, that's all a hero needs. For months after Kamino Ward, the training room at the secure Yui facility had seen better days. Scorch marks blackened the reinforced walls where fire quirks had misfired. Ice covered one corner in a perpetual winter that the heating system couldn't quite overcome. The floor was cracked and patched from strength enhancements gone wrong, and the ceiling bore gouges from a particularly volatile encounter with a wind manipulation quirk that had nearly taken Izuku's head off. Izuku stood in the center of it all, sweat dripping down his face as he maintained his focus on a simple exercise, manifesting only one quirk at a time. Strength enhancement, he murmured, feeling the familiar burn as his muscles adapted. The weights in his hands, 50 kilograms each, felt light as feathers. Hold for 30 seconds. Around him, monitoring equipment tracked every biometric imaginable. Heart rate, brain activity, electromagnetic output, even air pressure changes. Dr. Kudai-Garaki's former research had been invaluable in understanding how multiple quirks interacted within a single body, though the ethical implications of using a villain's work made Izuku's stomach turn. Good, came All Might's voice through the intercom. Now switch to the hardening quirk. This was always the tricky part. Izuku let the strength enhancement fade, feeling his muscles return to normal, then reached for a different thread in his mental landscape. The quirks appeared to him now as glowing filaments, each one a different color and texture. The hardening quirk felt rough and solid, like touching sandpaper made of light. His skin shifted, taking on the metallic sheen of hardened steel. The transition was smoother than it had been even a week ago. In the early days, switching between quirks had been like trying to conduct an orchestra where every musician was playing a different song. Now at least, he could get them to play one at a time. Excellent progress. Principal Nisa's voice joined All Might's. You held the isolation for 43 seconds that time. Your control is improving exponentially. Izuku allowed himself a small smile as he let the hardening fade. 4 months of intensive training, and he was finally making real progress. The voices were still there, would probably always be there, but they were quieter now. More manageable. He'd learned to think of them not as intruders but as roommates. Unwelcome ones, perhaps, but roommates nonetheless. The intercom crackled again. Take a 15-minute break, then we'll work on the sensing exercises. Izuku nodded and moved to the bench where his water bottle waited. The sensing exercises were both his favorite and most frightening part of training. Over the months, he'd discovered that All for One's power didn't just let him take quirks, it let him perceive them with startling clarity. Every person with a quirk appeared to glow in his enhanced vision, their power manifesting as threads of light extending from their core. He could see the basic nature of their abilities, their strength, even how often they were used. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Beautiful because quirks were amazing things, each one unique and wonderful in its own way. Terrifying because he could see exactly how to take them. The knowledge was always there, intrusive and unwanted. When he looked at All Might's fading ember of One for All, part of his mind immediately catalogued the 17 different ways he could steal it. When Recovery Girl had treated his training injuries, he'd seen her healing quirk like a golden thread, and his brain had helpfully supplied a step-by-step guide for making it his own. He never acted on these impulses. Never even came close. But the fact that the knowledge existed, that it came so naturally, kept him awake at night. You're brooding again, Inko's voice interrupted his thoughts. His mother entered the training room carrying a lunchbox and wearing the special visitor's badge that let her access the secure facility. Just thinking, Izuku said, accepting the lunch gratefully. For months, and she never missed a single day. She'd taken a leave of absence from work, moved into the small apartment the Hero Commission had provided nearby, and made herself an unofficial part of his support team. About what? She settled beside him on the bench, and Izuku marveled again at how her presence always seemed to quiet the whispers. The exam, he admitted. It's next week. Next week. The UA entrance exam. Despite everything that had happened, despite the months of uncertainty and the ongoing questions about his stability, Principal Nisa had confirmed that Izuku could take the exam. There would be conditions, of course. Monitoring. A special proctor. Strict limitations on which quirks he could use, but he could try. Are you ready? Inko asked, though they both knew the answer was complicated. I don't know, Izuku said honestly. I can control individual quirks better now. I can sense other quirks without immediately wanting to take them. The voices are quieter. But I still have All for One's power. I still carry the quirks of nearly 300 people who had their lives destroyed. How do I become a hero with that kind of burden? Inko was quiet for a moment, then reached into the lunch box and pulled out his favorite sandwich. Do you remember when you were 7, and you found that injured bird? Izuku blinked at the apparent non sequitur. Yeah. Its wing was broken. And what did you do? I brought it home. We made a nest for it in a shoebox and fed it until its wing healed. He paused. What does that have to do with? The bird didn't choose to be injured, Inko said gently. But you chose to help it anyway. You didn't blame it for being hurt. You didn't think it was dangerous or wrong. You just saw something that needed care, and you gave it. Mom, those voices in your head, the quirks you carry, they're like that bird, aren't they? Injured things that need care. All for one hurt them, stole them, trapped them. But you could heal them. The idea was so simple and so profound that Izuku felt tears prick at his eyes. I don't know how. You'll figure it out, Inko said with the confidence only a mother could have. Because that's who you are. The boy who saves injured birds. The boy who wants to help everyone. Before Izuku could respond, the intercom crackled to life. Midoriya, please report to the main conference room. We have visitors. Visitors were rare at the secure facility. Izuku exchanged glances with his mother, then made his way through the corridors he'd come to know well. The conference room held 3 people, Principal Nizu, All Might, and a woman Izuku didn't recognize with sharp features and a stern expression. Izuku, Nizu began, I'd like you to meet Madam President of the Hero Public Safety Commission. The woman, the head of the entire hero system in Japan, studied Izuku with calculating eyes. So you're the boy carrying All for One's legacy? Yes, ma'am, Izuku said quietly. Show me. It wasn't a request. Izuku glanced at Nizu, who nodded permission. Taking a deep breath, Izuku let his enhanced vision activate. The world exploded into light as everyone's quirks became visible. All Might's ember burned gold and warm, though so dim now that it barely registered. Nizu's high-spec quirk manifested as intricate patterns of silver light around his brain. And the commission president. You have a mental shielding quirk, Izuku said, studying the barrier of dark energy surrounding her thoughts. And something else. Enhancement type, but I can't see the details through the shielding. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. Impressive. Yes, I have cognitive protection and tactical analysis quirks. Very few people can perceive them at all. The sensing ability is remarkable, Nizu agreed. He can identify quirk types, relative strength, even usage patterns from visual observation alone. Can you take them? The president asked bluntly. The question hung in the air like a blade. Izuku felt his throat go dry. Technically, yes. The knowledge is there. But I won't. I would never, even if I ordered you to. Especially then, Izuku said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. No one should have their quirk taken against their will. Ever. Something shifted in the president's expression. Good. Because that's exactly the test I was looking for. She turned to Nizu. He can take the entrance exam, but he'll be monitored at all times, and any use of quirk theft, even temporary borrowing, will result in immediate disqualification and reassessment. Understood, Nizu replied. Wait, Izuku interjected. What if someone's in danger? What if the only way to save them requires using? He gestured vaguely at himself. Then you'd better find another way, the president said coldly. Heroes don't steal to save people, Midoriya. They sacrifice. Her words echoed in Izuku's mind long after she'd left. Heroes don't steal to save people. But what if stealing, or borrowing, was the only option? What if someone would die otherwise? 7 days later, the morning of the UA entrance exam dawned gray and overcast, perfectly matching Izuku's mood. He stood before the gates of his dream school, surrounded by hundreds of other hopeful students, and felt like a fraud. He'd been given permission to use 3 specific quirks during the exam: a basic strength enhancement, a durability quirk, and enhanced reflexes. All of them were safe, quirks that wouldn't raise questions or suspicions. He was to avoid any quirk that might reveal his true nature. Remember, came All Might's voice through the nearly invisible earpiece he wore. You're Izuku Midoriya, aspiring hero. That's all anyone needs to know. Easy for him to say. All Might wasn't carrying the literal ghosts of hundreds of victims in his head. The written exam had gone well enough. Izuku's analytical skills hadn't diminished, and his enhanced cognition, carefully controlled, helped him process information faster than ever. It was the practical exam that worried him. President Mick's voice boomed across the assembly area, explaining the rules. Defeat robot villains to earn points. 3 different types, worth different amounts. Avoid the zero-pointer. It was just an obstacle. Simple enough. Izuku could handle simple. The gates opened, and chaos erupted. Izuku had thought he was prepared. For months of training, careful control exercises, meditation techniques to keep the quirks separated and manageable. He'd been doing so well in the controlled environment of the facility. But the entrance exam wasn't controlled. Hundreds of quirks activated simultaneously around him. Fire, ice, explosions, super speed, hardening, acid, gravity manipulation, a symphony of power that his enhanced senses perceived in overwhelming detail. Every quirk called to him, each one a thread he could reach out and grasp. Take them, whispered the part of his mind that wasn't entirely his own. You could be the most powerful student here. You could guarantee your acceptance. No, Izuku muttered through gritted teeth, forcing himself to focus on only his approved quirks. Strength, durability, reflexes. Just those 3. He launched himself at the nearest one-pointer, a basic combat robot. His enhanced strength crushed its head with a single punch, and he moved on to the next target. It felt good to finally use his power for something positive, something heroic. Around him, other students showcased their abilities. A boy with engines in his legs zipped between robots with mechanical precision. A girl with a creation quirk materialized a cannon and began systematically destroying targets. Someone with a hardening quirk simply walked through robot attacks and pummeled them into scrap. Izuku found his rhythm. Punch, dodge, destroy, move on. His enhanced reflexes let him avoid most attacks, and his durability meant the few hits he took barely registered. He was actually doing well. Then he heard the scream. Time seemed to slow as Izuku turned toward the sound. A massive explosion had brought down part of a building, trapping several examinees under rubble. He could see them struggling, could hear their cries for help. Other students were trying to dig them out, but they were too slow. The building was still collapsing, more debris falling every second. Someone was going to die. Izuku's enhanced vision swept the area, automatically cataloging every quirk in range. There, a girl with short brown hair was running toward the trapped students. Her quirk glowed bright pink in his perception, gravity manipulation of some kind. She was going to try to lift the debris, but she was too far away. Even at full speed, she wouldn't reach them before the next collapse. The people under the rubble had maybe 30 seconds before. Without thinking, Izuku reached out. It wasn't like the brutal theft he'd witnessed all for one perform. This was gentler, more like borrowing. He touched the speed quirk of a boy running past him, just a light contact, taking only what he needed for a few seconds. The world blurred. Suddenly Izuku was moving faster than humanly possible, crossing the distance to the collapsed building in the space between heartbeats. He reached the trapped students just as another support beam gave way, catching it with his enhanced strength and holding it steady. Get them out! He shouted to the gravity girl, who had finally arrived. I can't hold this for long. She didn't hesitate, pressing her hands to the debris and making it weightless. Together, they pulled 3 unconscious students from the wreckage just as Izuku's borrowed speed quirk faded, returning to its original owner. The boy stumbled slightly as his quirk returned, looking confused but unharmed. He probably thought he'd just overexerted himself. Thank you, the girl gasped, and Izuku realized she was the same one he'd seen trying to reach the trapped students. I don't think I could have gotten them out in time without you. It's fine, Izuku said automatically, but inside, he was anything but fine. He'd done it. He'd used all for one's power in the field. He'd stolen someone's quirk, even temporarily, even for a good cause. The sensation had been intoxicating. The rush of new power, the way the quirk had slotted perfectly into his arsenal, the incredible capability it had granted him. This is how it starts, the voices whispered. Just a little theft. Just to help people. And then a little more. And more. Until you're taking whatever you want, whenever you want it. Are you okay? The girl asked, and Izuku realized he was shaking. I'm fine, he lied. Just glad everyone's safe. The rest of the exam passed in a blur. Izuku managed to rack up a respectable number of points, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. Every robot he destroyed felt hollow compared to the rush of using a stolen quirk to save those students. When the exam ended, he found himself standing outside the gates again, surrounded by chattering students comparing their performances. Most seemed confident, excited about their chances. Izuku felt sick. How did it go? All Might asked as they walked back to the secure facility. I used it, Izuku said quietly. All Might stopped walking. What? All for One's power. I borrowed someone's speed quirk to save some trapped students. I gave it back immediately, and the person wasn't hurt, but... Izuku's voice trailed off. But you broke the rules, All Might said heavily. People were going to die, Izuku protested. I could see it happening. The building was collapsing, and they were too slow, and I was the only one who could reach them in time. What was I supposed to do? Let them die to follow arbitrary restrictions? No, All Might said after a long moment. No, you couldn't do that. It's not in your nature. He sighed. But this complicates things significantly. They walked in silence for several blocks before All Might spoke again. How did it feel? Izuku knew what he was really asking. Good, he admitted. Too good. I understood, for just a moment, why All for One became what he did. The power, it's addictive, and that terrifies you. Yes, good, All Might said, surprising him. Fear of corruption is often the best defense against it. All for One stopped fearing his own power a long time ago. As long as you maintain that fear, that awareness of the danger. I might not become him, Izuku finished. You might not. 3 weeks later, the letter from Yui arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. Izuku stared at the thin envelope with mounting dread. Thin usually meant rejection. His mother sat beside him on their small couch, her hand resting supportively on his shoulder. Whatever it says, I'm proud of you for trying. Izuku nodded and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. A small device fell out, projecting a hologram of All Might in his hero costume. Young Midoriya. The projection boomed. I hope you're sitting down, because I have some news that might knock you off your feet. Izuku held his breath. First, the practical exam. You scored 43 villain points, which would have been respectable but not quite enough for admission. However, there's something you didn't know about the exam. Rescue points. Points awarded for heroic actions that save others. The projection showed footage from the exam. Izuku saving the trapped students, moving with impossible speed to reach them in time. Your rescue of 3 fellow examinees earned you 60 rescue points, giving you a total of 103 points. More than enough for admission. Welcome to Yui High School, young hero. The projection ended, leaving the apartment in stunned silence. You did it, Inko whispered, tears streaming down her face. You're going to be a hero. Izuku stared at the now silent device, emotions warring in his chest. Joy at being accepted. Pride at succeeding despite everything. But underneath it all, a gnawing worry. He'd gotten into Yui by using All for One's power. By stealing, even temporarily. The very act that had saved those students had also proven how easily he could cross lines he'd sworn never to cross. Mom, he said quietly, what if I'm not strong enough? What if the power corrupts me like it did him? Inko turned to face him fully, her hands framing his face. Then you'll have people who love you to remind you who you really are. You'll have classmates to protect. You'll have teachers to guide you. And you'll have a choice to make every single day. Be the hero or be the villain. What if I choose wrong? Then you'll have to live with the consequences, Inko said honestly. But I don't think you will. Do you know why? Why? Because you're asking the question. Villains don't worry about becoming villains, Izuku. They just become them. The fact that you're afraid of your own power means you respect it. And that respect will keep you on the right path. Izuku wanted to believe her. Needed to believe her. Because in 3 months, he'd be starting at Yui Academy, surrounded by future heroes who had no idea what kind of power sat among them. He'd have to hide what he was. He'd have to resist the constant temptation to take their quirks. He'd have to prove every day that he was worthy of the hero name despite carrying a villain's legacy. But as he looked at his mother's proud, loving face, as he thought about the students he'd saved during the exam, as he remembered the rush of using his power to help instead of harm. Izuku felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he could be a hero with a villain's quirk. Maybe he could prove that power itself wasn't evil, only the choices made with it. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be temptations, tests, moments where the easy path would be to simply take what he needed from others. But he wouldn't walk that road alone. He had his mother's love, All Might's guidance, and now, a chance to prove himself among the next generation of heroes. It would have to be enough, because the alternative, becoming what All for One wanted him to become, wasn't acceptable. Not while Izuku Midoriya still had a choice. The first day of classes at Yue High School dawned crisp and clear, with cherry blossoms drifting past the massive windows of Class 1A. Izuku sat in his assigned seat, hands folded carefully in his lap, trying to look like any other nervous first-year student. The reality was far more complicated. Beneath his desk, a small monitoring device tracked his vital signs, transmitting data to Principal Nizu's office in real time. A nearly invisible earpiece provided a direct line to the support team that had become his lifeline over the past 7 months. Most importantly, he wore a specially designed bracelet that would inject a quirk suppressant if his biometrics indicated loss of control. To everyone else in the classroom, he was just Izuku Midoriya, a quiet, analytical boy who'd somehow managed to score higher than most in the entrance exam. They had no idea they were sitting next to someone who could steal their quirks with a touch. Nervous? Asked the girl in the seat next to him. She had short brown hair and kind eyes, and Izuku recognized her from the entrance exam, the gravity quirk user he'd helped save those trapped students. A little, Izuku admitted, which was the understatement of the century. Through his enhanced senses, he could perceive every quirk in the room like glowing threads of power. Each one whispered to him, offered itself for taking. The constant temptation was exhausting. I'm Yuraraka Achiko, the girl said with a bright smile. Thanks again for helping during the exam. I never got to properly introduce myself. Midoriya Izuku, he replied, forcing himself to focus on her face instead of the pink glow of her gravity quirk. And it was nothing. Anyone would have done the same. Not everyone, said a new voice. A boy with dark hair and glasses had approached their cluster of desks. Your actions during the practical exam were most commendable. I am Ida Tenya. Izuku nodded politely, noting the blue-white gleam of engine quirks in the newcomer's calves. Nice to meet you, Ida. If I may ask, Ida continued, adjusting his glasses in a gesture that would become familiar, what exactly is your quirk? The speed you displayed during the rescue was remarkable, but I couldn't quite identify the nature of your ability. This was the question Izuku had been dreading. The cover story had been carefully crafted by Principal Nizu and the support team, designed to explain his analytical abilities and enhanced senses while hiding the true nature of his power. It's called quirk analysis, Izuku said, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. I can observe and understand how other people's quirks work, and temporarily enhance my own physical abilities based on what I learn. It wasn't entirely false. He could analyze quirks with unprecedented accuracy. And he could enhance himself, just not in the way he was implying. Fascinating, Ida exclaimed. A quirk that grows stronger through study and observation. How wonderfully suited for hero work. Yeah, Izuku agreed weakly. The irony wasn't lost on him. His quirk was indeed perfectly suited for hero work. It was also perfectly suited for becoming the greatest villain who ever lived. Get out of my way, extras. The familiar voice made Izuku's blood run cold. He turned to see Katsuki Bakugo stalking into the classroom, explosive hands already crackling with small sparks. Their eyes met across the room, and Izuku saw something unsettling in his childhood friend's gaze. Not just the usual disdain, but genuine confusion. Deku, Bakugo said, the nickname dripping with venom. So you actually made it in. How the hell did a quirkless loser like you? He stopped mid-sentence, eyes narrowing. Through his enhanced perception, Izuku could see Bakugo's confusion as a physical thing, the way his explosive quirk flickered with uncertainty. You're different, Bakugo said slowly. Something's changed about you. I manifested a quirk, Izuku said quickly, sticking to the rehearsed story. It was a late bloomer situation. The doctors think. Bullshit. Bakugo's voice was flat, dangerous. I've known you since we were in diapers, Deku. You don't just suddenly develop a quirk at 14. That's not how it works. The classroom had gone quiet, other students sensing the tension. Izuku felt sweat beading on his forehead as multiple quirks in his collection began to resonate with his stress. A temperature control quirk made the air around him shimmer with heat. It happens sometimes, Uraraka interjected, clearly trying to defuse the situation. Late manifestation isn't unheard of. Stay out of this, round face, Bakugo snarled, but his eyes never left Izuku. I want to know what really happened to you, Deku, because the last time I saw you, you were the same quirkless nobody you'd always been. Now you're here, at UA, and something about you is just wrong. He knows, whispered one of the voices in Izuku's head. He can sense the wrongness in you. The stolen power. I don't know what you're talking about, Izuku said, but his voice cracked slightly. He could feel his controls slipping, multiple quirks trying to activate at once in response to his emotional state. Like hell you don't, Bakugo began, raising a sparking hand. That's enough. The voice was tired, bored, and came from a yellow sleeping bag that had somehow appeared at the front of the classroom without anyone noticing. A man with long black hair and bloodshot eyes emerged from the bag like some kind of caterpillar, fixing the entire class with a withering stare. I'm Aizawa Shota, your homeroom teacher, he said, as if threatening classmates with explosion quirks was perfectly normal. We're burning daylight with all this chatter. Change into your gym clothes and meet me outside for a quirk assessment test. A quirk assessment test? Several students echoed. UA is known for its freestyle educational policy, Aizawa explained with air quotes. That applies to us teachers too. Bakugo, you scored the highest on the entrance exam, correct? In middle school, what was your farthest softball throw? 67 meters, Bakugo answered, still glaring at Izuku. Try it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed him a softball. Do whatever you want, just don't leave the circle. Bakugo caught the ball with a predatory grin, his earlier confusion momentarily forgotten. Finally, something interesting. He stepped into the marked circle, winding up for a pitch. Die! The explosion was tremendous, echoing across the campus as the softball disappeared into the distance trailing smoke. When the dust cleared, Aizawa held up a device showing the result. 705.2 meters, he announced. This is what you'll be doing today, 8 physical tests using your quirks. UA expects more from its students than any other school. Plus ultra and all that. As the class murmured excitedly, Aizawa's expression darkened. Oh, and whoever comes in last place will be expelled. Immediately, the announcement hit the class like a physical blow. Students who had been chattering excitedly fell silent, the weight of the threat settling over them. That's not fair, Uraraka protested. It's only our first day. Natural disasters aren't fair, Aizawa replied coldly. Villain attacks aren't fair. Death isn't fair. Heroes have to overcome unfair situations every day. If you can't handle this, you don't belong here. This is it, Izuku thought, feeling his heart rate spike. The monitoring device beneath his desk would be sending alerts to Nisa's office right now. I have to use my quirks in front of everyone. I have to maintain the lie while competing with some of the most talented students in Japan. 30 minutes later, the class stood in their gym uniforms on one of UA's many training fields. Izuku tried to blend in with the crowd, but he could feel eyes on him, Bakugo's suspicious glare, Ida's curious attention, and worst of all, the analytical stare of a boy with heterochromatic eyes who stood slightly apart from the others. Shoto Todoroki. Izuku had read about him, of course. Son of the number 2 hero Endeavor, recommended for admission rather than taking the exam like everyone else. His quirk was half cold, half hot, giving him control over both ice and fire. What Izuku's research hadn't prepared him for was how Todoroki's quirk looked to his enhanced senses. Most quirks appeared as single threads of light, but Todoroki's was split, burning red fire on his left side, crystalline blue ice on his right. They existed in perfect balance, neither overwhelming the other. It was beautiful. And the part of Izuku that wasn't entirely his own whispered about how easy it would be to take that balance for himself. First test is the 50-meter dash, Aizawa called out. Pair up and get ready. Izuku found himself matched with a boy who had tape dispensers for elbows. Simple enough. He activated his enhanced reflexes quirk, one of the safe ones he was allowed to use, and managed a respectable 5.8 seconds. Not the fastest in the class, but solid. The grip strength test was where things got complicated. Izuku could use the basic strength enhancement quirk he'd been practicing with, but as he squeezed the device, he felt other strength quirks resonating in sympathy. A sugar-powered strength boost, a quirk that converted anger into physical power, something that seemed to draw energy from the ground itself. Use them, the voices whispered. Why settle for one when you could have them all? 6.2, the device read as he released it. Good, but not exceptional. Safe, Deku. Izuku turned to find Bakugo standing entirely too close, explosive hands still sparking. What was that? What was what? Your grip strength. In middle school, you could barely crack 30 kilograms. Now you're pulling numbers that would make some pro heroes jealous. Bakugo's eyes narrowed. And don't give me some crap about late-blooming quirks. I know what I saw. People change, Kaken, Izuku said quietly, using the childhood nickname without thinking. Something flickered across Bakugo's face, surprise, maybe even hurt, before the usual anger reasserted itself. Don't call me that here. And this conversation isn't over. The other tests passed in a blur of carefully controlled power. Standing long jump with enhanced leg strength. Sit-ups with the durability quirk that let him ignore muscle fatigue. Distance running with improved stamina and oxygen efficiency. Each test required delicate balance. Performed too poorly, and he risked expulsion. Performed too well, and he'd draw attention he couldn't afford. Izuku aimed for the middle of the pack, good enough to survive but not enough to stand out. It was during the softball throw that everything went wrong. Midoriya, Aizawa called. You're up. Izuku stepped into the circle, acutely aware of every pair of eyes watching him. This was the test that had made Bakugo's score so impressive, 705 meters with an explosion-enhanced throw. What could someone with a quirk analysis ability manage? He wound up, channeling his basic strength enhancement quirk and preparing to throw the ball as hard as he could manage safely. Maybe 100 meters. Respectable but not remarkable. Then Aizawa's quirk activated. Izuku felt it like a physical blow, the sudden absence of his quirks as erasure took effect. For someone who had lived with hundreds of voices in his head for months, the silence was deafening. He stumbled, overwhelmed by the sudden change. I see, Aizawa said quietly, his red eyes glowing. Your quirk is quite powerful, isn't it? That's why you were holding back. He doesn't know, Izuku realized with relief. He thinks I was just being cautious. But the relief was short-lived. As Aizawa blinked and his quirk deactivated, the voices came rushing back like a tsunami. Months of careful control shattered as hundreds of quirk factors flooded his consciousness at once. Give us back our power. He's weak now, take his quirk. So many potential hosts here. Just a little theft. No one would know. No, Izuku gasped, fighting for control. But the damage was done. Multiple quirks activated simultaneously. Strength, speed, even a minor telekinetic quirk that had been stolen from a child decades ago. The softball left his hand with explosive force, trailing energy as it disappeared into the distance. When the smoke cleared, Aizawa's device showed an impossible reading. 1,247.6 meters, he announced, but his expression was troubled. The class erupted in amazed chatter, but Izuku barely heard it. He was focused on getting his quirks back under control, cycling through breathing exercises and mental barriers that had taken months to develop. Midoriya, a quiet voice said beside him. Are you all right? Izuku turned to find Todoroki studying him with those mismatched eyes. I'm fine. Just used more power than I meant to. Your quirk, Todoroki said slowly. It's not what you told everyone, is it? I don't know what you mean, Izuku said quickly, but he could see the suspicion in Todoroki's gaze. That throw. I felt something when you released the ball. Like? Todoroki paused, frowning. Like something was pulling at my quirk. Just for a moment. Shit. In his loss of control, Izuku must have unconsciously reached for nearby quirks. He hadn't taken anything, but Todoroki was apparently sensitive enough to feel the attempted connection. I really don't. Midoriya! Both boys turned to see All Might approaching at a jog, though he was in his deflated form. To the class, he probably looked like some random teacher checking on a student. To Izuku, he looked panicked. Young man, I need you to come with me for a moment, All Might said, trying to project casual authority. Principal Nizu wants to discuss your performance. As they walked away from the group, All Might leaned in close. What happened? The monitoring station went crazy during your throw. Half the sensors redlined. I lost control, Izuku admitted quietly. When Aizawa erased my quirks, and then when they came back all at once, I reached out without meaning to. I think Todoroki felt it. All Might's face went pale. How much did you take? Nothing, Izuku said quickly. I didn't actually steal anything. But for a second, I could feel the connection forming. If I hadn't pulled back, we need to talk to Nizu immediately, All Might decided. And we need to figure out what to tell Todoroki before he starts asking more questions. They returned to the group just as the final test concluded. Izuku had managed to place 7th overall, exactly where he'd hoped to be. Safe from expulsion, but not dominant enough to attract too much attention. Nobody failed, Aizawa announced to the visible relief of several students. That was just a logical ruse to make sure you gave it your all. Though some of you clearly have more potential than you're showing. His eyes lingered on Izuku for a moment before moving on. 3 days later, the regular academic classes at UA were surprisingly normal. Literature with Cementas, math with ectoplasm, English with present mic, all subjects that Izuku could handle without using any quirks beyond basic cognitive enhancement. It was the hero training that worried him. For today's basic hero training, All Might announced to the class in his muscled form, we'll be conducting battle trials. And to go with these indoor battles, you'll need these. Cases emerged from the wall, each one numbered to correspond with the student's seat. Inside Izuku's case was a costume that bore little resemblance to the original design he'd submitted. The green base was still there, but it had been heavily modified with additional padding, monitoring equipment, and what looked like miniature shock devices. Safeguards, Izuku realized. In case I lose control, put on your costumes and meet at ground beta. All Might instructed. It's time to see what you can do in a real combat scenario. 20 minutes later, Class 1A stood assembled in their hero costumes. Some, like Bakugo and Todoroki, looked like natural-born heroes. Others, like Mineta and his bizarre grape costume, were less impressive. Izuku's costume felt heavy with all the additional equipment, but he had to admit the support team had done good work. The basic design was still recognizably his, even if it now looked more like tactical gear than a traditional hero outfit. For this exercise, All Might explained, you'll be split into teams of 2. One team will be heroes, the other villains. The villains will guard a nuclear weapon on the 5th floor of the building. The heroes must either capture the villains or secure the weapon within 15 minutes. He reached into a box and began drawing lots. First match, Team A versus Team D. Izuku looked down at his lot. Team A. His teammate was Uraraka. That was manageable. She was kind, trusting, and her quirk didn't seem to resonate dangerously with his own. The opposing team made his blood run cold. Team D, All Might announced, Bakugo Katsuki and Ida Tenya, of course. Because fate apparently had a sense of humor, Izuku would be facing his childhood tormentor in his very first hero exercise. Bakugo, who was already suspicious about his sudden change, who knew him well enough to spot inconsistencies in his story. This is bad, Uraraka said quietly as they walked toward the designated building. Bakugo looked like he wanted to murder you during that draw. He's always like that, Izuku lied. The truth was more complicated. Bakugo had been watching him all week, clearly trying to figure out what had changed about his former victim. This exercise would give him the perfect excuse to test his theories. What's our strategy? Uraraka asked as they reached the entrance. Izuku forced himself to focus. Strategy. He could do strategy. Bakugo will come after me directly. He won't be able to resist the chance to prove his superiority. Ida will probably stay with the weapon, but he might try to intercept us on the upper floors. So we split up? No, Izuku said, remembering the cardinal rule of hero work. We stick together. Bakugo is dangerous alone, but he's also predictable. If we can. The wall beside them exploded. Izuku tackled Uraraka to the side as concrete rained down, his enhanced reflexes the only thing that saved them from the full force of Bakugo's opening assault. Through the smoke and debris, he could see the familiar silhouette of his childhood friend. DKU. Bakugo's voice was pure rage as he launched himself through the hole he'd created. Let's see what you're really hiding. Izuku rolled aside as another explosion scorched the ground where he'd been lying. This wasn't the controlled sparring he'd experienced in training. This was personal. Uraraka, get to the objective, he called out, drawing Bakugo's attention to himself. I'll handle him. But, go! She nodded reluctantly and activated her quirk, making herself weightless and floating toward the stairwell. Bakugo moved to intercept her, but Izuku blocked his path. Your fight is with me, Kaken. Damn right it is, Bakugo snarled, gauntlets already glowing with stored nitroglycerin. Time to find out what kind of monster you've become. The word monster hit harder than any explosion could have. Because wasn't that exactly what Izuku had become? A creature carrying the stolen power of hundreds of victims, pretending to be a hero while fighting the constant urge to take more? Bakugo's next attack was massive, a concentrated explosion that lit up the entire floor. Izuku dove behind a pillar, feeling the heat wash over him. His costume's cooling systems kicked in, but he could already smell singed fabric. Stop hiding! Bakugo roared. Show me what you really are. He wants to see your power, the voices whispered. Show him. Take his quirk and show him what real strength looks like. No, Izuku muttered, but even as he denied the voices, he could feel his control slipping. The stress of combat, the familiar environment of being hunted by Bakugo, the pressure to perform, it was all too much. Multiple quirks began to activate without his permission. Strength enhancement flooded his muscles. His reflexes sharpened to superhuman levels. A defensive quirk hardened his skin to near-metallic density. When Bakugo rounded the pillar for his next attack, Izuku was ready. He moved faster than he'd ever moved in training, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat. His punch, enhanced by multiple strength quirks, caught Bakugo in the solar plexus and launched him across the room. Bakugo hit the wall hard enough to crack concrete, but his eyes were bright with vindication rather than pain. There it is, he gasped, struggling to his feet. That's not a late-blooming quirk, Deku. That's something else entirely. I don't know what. Cut the bullshit. Bakugo's hands erupted with his largest explosion yet, and Izuku barely managed to activate a barrier quirk in time to deflect it. Nobody develops that kind of power overnight. Nobody changes that much. The barrier flickered and died, leaving Izuku exposed. Bakugo was advancing, hands smoking, and Izuku could see the calculation in his eyes. His childhood friend had always been smart, always been able to read combat situations with frightening accuracy. Whatever happened to you, Bakugo said, whoever gave you this power, I'm going to drag the truth out of you right here. He raised his gauntlets, the stored nitroglycerin building to dangerous levels. This next attack would be massive, probably enough to level half the floor. All Might would have to intervene before someone got seriously hurt, unless Izuku stopped it himself. Just a touch, the voices urged. One moment of contact, and you could drain his explosive quirk completely. He'd be powerless. Harmless. Izuku looked at his raised hands and realized with horror that he was actually considering it. The knowledge was right there, instinctive and immediate. He could see the exact pressure points on Bakugo's body where his quirk factor was strongest. One grab, one moment of focused intent, and he could end this fight permanently. No, he whispered, but his body was already moving. Bakugo unleashed his attack at the same moment Izuku reached for him. The explosion was tremendous, filling the entire floor with light and sound. But through it all, Izuku felt his hand make contact with Bakugo's wrist. For a moment, just a moment, the connection formed. He could feel Bakugo's quirk like liquid fire in his hand, could sense the nitroglycerin production that gave his childhood friend such devastating power. It would be so easy to pull, to drain it away, to stop. The single word, spoken in All Might's voice through his earpiece, was enough to break Izuku's focus. He jerked his hand back as if burned, but the damage was done. For several seconds, Bakugo's quirk didn't respond to his commands. What? Bakugo stared at his hands in confusion. What did you do to me? Nothing. Bakugo's quirk flickered back to life, small pops of explosion returning to his palms. But the look in his eyes had changed from anger to something deeper. Something that might have been fear. That was you, he said quietly. Whatever happened to my quirk just now, that was you. The exercise is over. All Might's voice boomed through the building's speakers, cutting off any response Izuku might have made. Both teams report to the observation room for analysis. As they walked back in heavy silence, Izuku caught sight of his reflection in a broken window. For just a moment, he thought he saw someone else looking back, a figure with a scarred face and empty eye sockets, smiling with satisfaction. You're learning, All for One's voice whispered in his memory. Power is meant to be taken, not given. Soon you'll understand. Izuku closed his eyes and tried to push the voice away. But deep down, in a part of himself he didn't want to acknowledge, he wondered if the villain might be right. Later that day, we need to talk. Izuku looked up from his desk to find Todoroki standing beside him, those heterochromatic eyes serious and searching. The rest of the class was filtering out after the day's final bell, chattering about homework and weekend plans. About what? Izuku asked, though he already knew. Your quirk, Todoroki said simply. During the assessment test, and again during the battle trial. Both times, I felt something strange when you used your power. Izuku glanced around the classroom. Most students had left, but Bakugo was still at his desk, clearly listening to every word despite pretending to pack his bag. I don't know what you're talking about, Izuku said carefully. Yes, you do. Todoroki pulled up a chair, settling into it with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. I have a theory. Would you like to hear it? No. Sure. Your quirk isn't quirk analysis, Todoroki said quietly. That's just what you tell people. Your real ability has something to do with affecting other people's quirks directly. The classroom fell silent. Even Bakugo had stopped pretending to pack, his explosive hands very still on his desk. That's ridiculous, Izuku stammered. Why would you think? Because both times you've used significant power, I've felt something pulling at my ice quirk, Todoroki interrupted. And during the battle trial, Bakugo's explosion stopped working properly for several seconds after you touched him. Shit. Shit. Plus, Todoroki continued relentlessly, your cover story doesn't make sense. Quirk analysis might let you understand how powers work, but it wouldn't give you the kind of physical enhancement you displayed. That was at least 3 different quirk effects working in concert. Bakugo was standing now, his bag forgotten. 3 different quirks, he repeated slowly. That's not possible unless... The two boys looked at each other, and Izuku saw the moment when they both reached the same impossible conclusion. Multiple quirks, Todoroki breathed. You have multiple quirks. That's impossible, Izuku said desperately. People can have more than one, can't they? Bakugo's voice was deadly quiet. There are rumors, aren't there? Urban legends about villains who could steal quirks. About a man who collected them like trophies, all for one. They were talking about all for one without knowing they were talking about all for one. You're both being ridiculous, Izuku said, standing up so quickly his chair fell over. Multiple quirks don't exist. I have one quirk, just like everyone else, and... Then prove it, Todoroki said simply. What? If you only have one quirk, prove it. Show us exactly how quirk analysis let you throw a softball over a kilometer or move fast enough to dodge Bakugo's explosions at point-blank range. Izuku opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. There was no way to explain his performance without admitting to the truth. And these two, Bakugo who knew him too well and Todoroki who was too analytically minded, wouldn't be satisfied with vague explanations. He began, then stopped. Through his enhanced senses, he could feel their quirks calling to him. Bakugo's explosive power, Todoroki's perfect balance of fire and ice. It would be so easy to reach out and take them, to silence their questions permanently. Do it, the voices urged. They're too close to the truth. Take their quirks and they won't be able to tell anyone. I have to go, Izuku said abruptly, grabbing his bag and heading for the door. Deku! Bakugo called after him. This conversation isn't over. But Izuku was already running, fleeing down the hallway as fast as his unenhanced legs could carry him. Behind him, he could hear Todoroki's calm voice saying something to Bakugo, but he couldn't make out the words over the sound of his own panicked breathing. He made it to the bathroom before the breakdown hit. Locking himself in a stall, Izuku sank to his knees as the weight of everything crashed down on him. The constant vigilance, the careful lies, the growing suspicion of his classmates, it was all falling apart. Worse, he'd almost done it. For a moment in that classroom, faced with exposure, he genuinely considered using All for One's power on his own classmates. The knowledge of how to steal their quirks had been right there, ready and waiting. What kind of hero thinks about stealing quirks from other heroes? The answer came from the darkest part of his mind, in a voice that sounded disturbingly like All for One himself, the kind who was never meant to be a hero at all. His phone buzzed with a text from All Might, Nise's office. Now. We need to discuss damage control. Izuku closed his eyes and tried to find the strength to keep pretending. But as he left the bathroom and walked toward what would likely be another crisis meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that his time at UA was already running out. In the classroom he fled, Todoroki and Bakugo sat in heavy silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Multiple quirks, Bakugo finally said. That's the only explanation that makes sense. But how? Todoroki asked. And why lie about it? Bakugo was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Because he's scared. Whatever happened to him, whatever gave him that power, he's terrified of it. Should we tell someone? Who would believe us? Bakugo stood up, slinging his bag over his shoulder. Besides, if Deku is dangerous, we need to figure out how dangerous before involving the teachers. And if he's not? Bakugo paused at the classroom door, his expression unreadable. Then he's the same self-sacrificing idiot he's always been, just with the power to actually back it up. As they left the classroom together, an alliance born of shared suspicion, either boy noticed the small recording device that had been discreetly placed under Izuku's desk days earlier. In his office, Principal Nise listened to their conversation with growing concern. The situation was deteriorating faster than expected. Soon, he would have to make a choice, reveal the truth about Izuku's power to protect him, or find another way to contain the growing suspicion. Either way, the secret that had been carefully guarded for 7 months was beginning to unravel. And once it did, there would be no putting it back together.